Welcome to Full Chest. I hope you're having a great, magnificent week. Happy hump day, wherever you are right now, morning, evening. Thanks for watching. And again, please subscribe, like, hit the notification button so you get the episodes. Let's get some engagement on the channel. I'll appreciate your subscription so much. And thanks again for watching. So, it seems there's a new dawn in international relations in the world today. Is China the new savior for Africa? What has been the relationship between China and Africa? Where is it going? Has it been a good relationship? Some people might say yes, some people might say it's been great, like China has been doing so much for Africa. And some people might disagree, but it's left for perception and for what's happening in these various countries, right? And again, I believe that, China might be, having its shoulders up these days when it comes to its alternative form of aid that is being given to African countries a long time. These and a lot more, we're going to get into it, all right? It's Full Chest. Let's go.
Let's go, huh? Full chest. I go to war with my mom.
All right, so as most of you might not be aware, right? So there's this thing called the Forum for China-Africa Relations, right? And this happens, I think, about like every 3 years, where China invites the whole of Africa. I'm not kidding you. This is the whole of Africa. Now, there are 54 countries in Africa. All 54 countries go to China for a cup of tea. Now, I'm just playing. Not a cup of tea, but all African countries, apart from the Kingdom of Eswatini. So, not all, apart from one. Now, I'm not going to get into why Eswatini doesn't go, but all African countries go to literally every African country. Just imagine the power for you to invite a whole continent, like the whole continent, to your country. That's amazing. Like, that is, shout out to China. Like, that is something, right? So this is a summit, right? It's called the Forum for China-Africa Cooperation, actually, right? The FOCAC. And it happens, like I mentioned, every 3 years. Specifically, last year it happened, that's in 2024. And during the 2024 phase of it, it happened in Beijing. And the Chinese president pledged $50 billion of financial support to Africa over the next 3 years. Yummy. $50 billion. All right. So, the main kind of reason for this cooperation, is a multilateral coordination mechanism between African countries and China. So that is what it is. This FOCAC is a coordination that brings African countries and China together. Now, of course, for everything, there's always de facto and de jure. So, and the principles, which I'm going to read, and I love the principles. So, the principles of FOCAC is one, mutual respect for territory and sovereignty. It's great. Love it. Mutual non-aggression. Awesome. Who wouldn't like that? Mutual non-interference in internal affairs. Great. Equality and mutual benefit. This is equality and what? Mutual benefits. And then peaceful coexistence. These are great principles. Wouldn't you agree? It's great. I love all of them. Like, they're great principles. Nothing, nothing bad. These are great principles. But again, before I proceed, right? Now, before African countries run to China, we have to keep something in mind. Let's not be forgetting what is happening, what has happened. Even though it has happened, it's something to keep in mind as you proceed with your relationship. With anyone, with a country, with your girl, with whoever, you always have to keep in mind what happened in the past as you proceed, so you can make better decisions. It's just a common sense. So, like I mentioned, great principles, right? And all that. But one of my questions is that, are the sentiments shared equally? That's one question. Now, let's talk about China-Africa relations. Now, if you can remember, during COVID-19, Africa specifically had a huge issue with China. Why? Because according to Human Rights Watch, right, China treated Africans terribly during COVID-19. Now, one of the things was that Africans were forcibly tested and they were isolated in specific hotels just for Africa. If you were African, you were isolated in a hotel that non-Africans were not. So Africans were a special case for Chinese during COVID-19. Also, landlords evicted people and hotels wouldn't take anyone. Also, restaurants wouldn't like serve Africans or people from African descent, or no, not African descent, people who are Africans. They were not served, they were discriminated against. Call it what it is. That's what it was. So that's one. Another thing that, with China-Africa relations that's very interesting to me is that, of course, we know China already has a huge stronghold in Africa. They do a lot of things, especially to one of my favorite countries in Africa, in Southern Africa, the great Zambia. Zambia is an awesome country. If you haven't gone to Zambia, you should go. So I've gone to Zambia before and I spent some time there. And once you land in Zambia, you feel China. The airport built by China. Most real estate in Zambia is controlled by the Chinese. Like most of the houses that are being built, you buy it from the Chinese. Like they control most of the real estate, the lands, which is something that is weird to me, but it is what it is, right? And also, you see that there's a lot of Chinese migrants in Zambia, so much of them. Like, I went to a place and it was just Chinese people. I was like, gosh, there's a lot of them in Africa. It's great. I don't have any problem with that. They even have a Chinatown in Zambia. There's a Chinatown. I went to that place too. It's like being in China, in Africa, in Zambia. This exists, right? And all this is great, right? There's no problem with it, right? And like I mean, don't get me wrong, it's great to have these relations. I don't have any problem with it. Again, another thing I want to also highlight is that as there are a great population of Chinese in Zambia, they also commit a lot of crimes. Newsflash, and cyber crimes. Yes, newsflash. It's not only Africans who do 419 and cyber crimes. There's a lot of other people that do it too, if you didn't know. And in Zambia,
internet fraud and online scams targeting people from Zambia and elsewhere. The magistrates court in the capital Lusaka jailed them for periods ranging from 7 to 11 years. They were part of a group of 77 people.
Like I mentioned before, there's no problem with having this relation, especially now with the way things are going when it comes to aid to Africa. China is going to be like a major bus stop for a lot of African countries. But again, like I mentioned, beware of the past. How has China treated Africans in Africa and outside of Africa? This is something that needs to, people need to bear in mind. People who are at the forefront. And who are the people in the forefront of this, partnerships and negotiations? The presidents, but, ambassadors and diplomats. Now, here's my message to the diplomats and ambassadors, right? Now, I hope that African ambassadors and diplomats, right, and people who negotiate these terms or these agreements or these, relationships, they understand mutual benefits in the sense of concessions, right? Concessions are like, you give me this, I give you that. In international relationships, concessions exist. And it's important for the right concessions to be given for the right thing. And there needs to be reciprocity in all ramifications and in various levels. My thing is that I hope African diplomats and ambassadors understand this. And when they do this, they just don't see money in their face and they're like, oh, they take money and they just forget to really think about the agreements and what they are agreeing to with China. African countries need to understand that sometimes China is playing the long game while Africa might be playing the short-term game. Now, another thing, and this is very important, and this might ruffle some shoulders. There's something called inferiority complex within the continent. And yes, it exists. And it exists in the psyche of a lot of Africans. In the sense that if you're not African, and when some Africans are dealing with non-Africans, there is this look of superiority that most Africans have on non-Africans, which is not good, and it doesn't help with negotiations. And I hope that our ambassadors and diplomats understand that there is no room for that, especially when you're dealing with things that might have a long-term effect on a country. So I hope that these things come in mind when negotiations are happening. And like I mentioned, remember what has happened. Remember COVID-19, when you're doing your aids and you're taking your aids, and when you're having back and forth, because the aids are not free. The aids come with something. So when you're agreeing to certain terms and conditions of your agreements, make sure you indicate that your people should not be treated bad. Now, that brings me to something, right? Also, going back to Zambia. In Zambia, there is an institute of Confucius. Now, if you don't know what the practice of Confucius is a Chinese way of life. So basically, within Zambia, the Chinese teach their way of, they have a school that teaches their way of life. It's great. There's nothing wrong with that. But I also hope that Zambia has a school in China that also teaches the way of life in Zambia. And I'm not trying to pick on Zambia. This goes to every African country, right? And this goes to the mutual benefit thing. I find it interesting that a lot of times Africa accepts the ideology of everybody else, but it's always hesitant to export its ideologies unapologetically. I've never seen an African school in any other country. If you have, please enlighten me. I've never seen that. But I always see like a French school, a German school. In Namibia, there are so many German schools. Again, nothing against these things, but again, reciprocity. Do we have the same access in their country? People might say, oh, who wants to? No. People want to learn about African. There are African studies in a lot of schools. A lot of schools in Europe, in Americas. Why don't Africans say, okay, if you're going to establish an institute in my country, let us establish an institute in your country as well. That's all I'm saying, right? Let the playing field be equal. That's all I'm saying. That's all. So finally, this is my final Fullchesttv take on this, right? So now a question is that, is China taking advantage of Africa, or is this really a mutual beneficial partnership in everything? In the roads they're building, the airports they're building, and all that good stuff. Is it mutually beneficial, or does China have a long-term game in mind? We don't know that, but it's something that has to be put in mind when these things are happening and when these agreements are happening. And like I mentioned before, right, if we're going to absorb the ideology and the culture and have a marketplace for other countries, like this is not a seasonal marketplace. The Chinatown in Zambia is not seasonal. It operates 365 days, every day, minute, second, time. In most African countries, you have, African Market Day. There is a market day for African souvenir. No. There needs to be a place designated for African stuff to be sold 365 days in a year, just like it is in all these places as well. So this is where we need to start getting to, where Africa needs to start getting to, so that things can equally benefit its citizens who are in those countries. If there were proper concessions and reciprocity in the relationships between China and the African countries who suffered the kind of discrimination they did in COVID-19, that wouldn't exist, because there will be consequences. There will be sanction that will prevail. Because you cannot tell me that these countries don't benefit from this agreement. They really benefit. It is not just Africa that is benefiting. They are benefiting as well. So as we move forward in this new dawn of aid and relations that might be coming forth, my thing is that African countries need to be careful. Remember the past. Play the long-term game. And make sure there is proper concessions and reciprocity. Full chest. Peace.